Welcome to tonight's Terror, where you can expect original scary stories. Nothing here is written or narrated by AI. If you enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for visiting, and enjoy the story.
The night Aiden Corey came into the emergency room, I didn't even notice her. She wasn't my patient, and if it weren't for her name on our track board, I wouldn't have known of her arrival at all. Aiden struck me as an odd name for a woman. It had grown in popularity among millennial parents as a boy name for years, but I'd never seen it for a girl. Two boy names, in fact, Aiden and Corey. I liked the sound of it. It was turning out to be a rare, slow night in the ER. These shifts weren't unheard of, but infrequent enough to savor when they came around every few weeks. I even caught up on some paperwork at the nursing station without interruption for an unprecedented 20 minutes. Glancing at my phone, I noticed a series of missed calls from Nicole, my best friend and neighbor. Our doors were just a few feet from one another, in a medium-sized, unremarkable apartment complex. She answered on the first ring. "Nikki, what's up?" I had her on speakerphone and was still half focused on the paperwork in front of me. She batted aside my greeting. "Diane, there was another fire at the Soch." We called our apartment complex the Soch after a misguided marketing campaign had rebranded it the Social. All they'd done was put up a new sign with a modern font and sell the property to new ownership. "No way, another one?" I replied. I'd given up on the forms in front of me and began rolling a dry erase marker between my hands as I listened. There had been a series of small but increasingly concerning fires set in the vicinity of our apartments over the last 2 weeks. Conversations with Nikki and other neighbors seemed to affirm the opinion that one, or a few, bored teenagers were behind it, pushing the limits of some newfound freedom and perhaps celebrating access to Bic lighters bought at the 7-Eleven. Nikki carried on. "This one was basically right outside our apartment. It looked like someone just tossed gasoline on the wall and lit it. I think if the walls weren't made of stucco, it would have spread." "Have the cops been? What's happening now?" "Yeah, I spoke with them. I told them about your car, too. I know you think that's different, but I don't." About 10 days prior, someone had let the air out of my car's front tires. I discovered this as I'd been heading to work. The front end was stooped noticeably, and when I walked closer, I saw the rubber of the tires gathered in a wrinkled heap around the rims. Crouching, I saw that the valve caps were gone. I stood and was greeted by a note stuffed under one windshield wiper. "I'm here now, bitch," written with oddly neat penmanship for such a nasty message. I remember laughing as I crumpled the paper. When I told Nicole about it, I'd done so assuming I'd tick someone off by taking their favorite parking spot. She disagreed. Nikki wanted me to involve the police, or at least building management. I'd forgotten about it almost immediately. For the next few minutes, Nicole talked about her plans to get us both wireless doorbell cameras. She was talking about monthly subscriptions, but I'd stopped listening. I was looking down the ER hallway. Someone was standing and looking at me. They were half obscured by the door frame, so I could only see the left hemisphere of their face and body. Even that wasn't much more than a dark outline. The lights outside patient rooms were dimmed after 10 p.m., but the bright fluorescence of the psych ward glowed meanly from the end of the hall. Against that backdrop, this figure looked like it might have been a trick of the shadowed hall, rather than a real person. A dark silhouette with fuzzy edges. I blinked and squinted at the spot. Whoever, or whatever it was, slid slowly back into the room and out of sight. "Diane, are you still there?" Nicole had concluded her sales pitch for doorbell cameras and wanted my go-ahead for an online order. "Yeah, Go for it. I'll pay you back, I assented, my eyes still trained on the vacant spot down the hall. Room 19, I thought absently. After assuring Nicole that I'd talk to our building manager about what happened to my car, we said goodbye. I was hurled back into the melee of a typical ER night for the next 3 hours without reprieve. The cast of patients was a lot of the same night after night. Alcohol poisoning, someone hustling us for pain medication, abdominal pain that was inevitably diagnosed as constipation, and the parade of injured people who'd overestimated their capabilities with a chainsaw, trampoline, or kitchen knife and avocado. Occasionally something exotic would walk or roll through the door, an injury involving a pet they shouldn't have owned in the first place, or an embarrassing sex accident. Most nights, the taxing part of my job was the pace and quantity, not the variety. It wasn't until I'd taken a break to eat and rest my feet that I thought of room 19 again. I scooted my chair across the nursing station to the computer and began to pull up our trackboard. Who was this creep, peering down the hall instead of lying in bed? Just then, one of the doctors named Kevin and Sherry, a fellow nurse, sidled up to the nursing station, already engaged in a tense exchange. They weren't arguing, more like commiserating. Kevin carried on, not noticing my shameless eavesdropping behind the counter. She's asked for a new nurse again? Sherry held up 3 fingers, nodding. I've told her that's not how things work. I don't really care, but I can't think of what I've done to upset her. Kevin began to read something off of his phone, clearly done with the subject. I'll go in. She's reporting non-specific back pain. Dollars to donuts she's after some Vicodin, and she's not getting it here tonight. He strolled off, looking down at his phone. Sherry, who are you talking about? I asked in a staged whisper. Aiden Corey. She's a treat. Orders me out of the room every time I come in. If you ask me, she belongs in psych. I knew she was going to be a pain as soon as she came in. She has these headscarves on, but she has them all over. Even her face. You can only see her eyes. I raised my eyebrows but didn't respond. Anyway, Sherry said with a yawn. You want her? Seems like she's angling for you to be her nurse. I'm all set with my constipated old men, thanks. I finished the boxed salad I'd bought on my way to work while reading People magazine. I'd have to find out what was next for the embattled Kevin Spacey later, because my break ended with a bang, literally. A patient, I assumed Aiden Corey, was storming down the hall, visibly furious. The doc must have refused her request for pain meds and discharged her. The headscarves were odd. As Sherry had said, her entire face was obscured, with the exception of her eyes. The effect was something a child might achieve, playing dress-up in their mother's closet. She pushed over a laundry cart, and it tumbled sidelong with a clatter. As she approached the nursing station, her stare turned to me, and for a moment I thought she was going to hurl some abuse, or worse. She stopped in front of me and turned. Without thinking, I stood and assumed a clumsy defensive position. We'd had plenty of aggressive patients in the past, but normally security was nearby. For whatever reason, no one had reacted to the sound of the laundry cart. I was alone. Looking at her up close, I didn't perceive any signal that she was going to assault me. Her hands weren't balled in fists. In fact, they rested calmly at her sides. I noticed she favored the same shade of nail polish as I did. She reached out and snatched my keys off the counter. Attached was the hard plastic badge I used to swipe in and out of doors around the hospital. She studied it for a moment. Then she spoke. She used a low, husky voice, like someone disguising themselves over the phone in a spy movie. I'm here now. You hear that, Diane Royce? She spat the question like a taunt. Hearing her say my name made me cold all over. The voice came from a swirl of deep purple head wraps, but no mouth. I could see her eyes. They were wide and piercing. The interaction was uncanny. It was as though I was standing in front of an abhuman creature from a Lovecraft story, not just a disturbed patient. Yet, at the same time, I thought she was familiar. Her voice, and the way she moved, lit on the shadow of a memory. Had I treated her before? Crossed paths with her in a cafe? A security guard's urgent footfalls interrupted our standoff. I sucked in a mouthful of air. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing some time after this woman had stepped to the counter. The guard, a wall of a man with a red and stubbled beard, stepped between us. "Ma'am, it's time to go," he said in a tired voice. The guards in the ER had seen it all, and this little scene scarcely moved the needle for him. He didn't register the warped electricity in the air between the women standing face to face in front of him. When my shift ended, I lingered at the nursing station long enough to catch Sherry between patients. I hooked her arm as she paced down the hall toward the bay of elevators. "Sherry, what happened with that weird patient?" Her eyes wandered upward in thought. "Who? Corey?" I nodded. Sherry yawned widely, not covering her mouth as she shrugged. "Nothing. Doctor discharged her. She was pissed off about something, but it wasn't the pain meds, surprisingly. She called you a bitch. Knew your name. That was weird. Did you ever even meet her?" "No. Well, not until after you were done with her. She stopped at the desk and read my name off my swipe badge. Then security walked her out." "Full moon. Weirdos," Sherry said over her shoulder as she veered away from me and toward our medication storage room. I rushed to ask, "What room did we have her in?" 19. The door to the medroom clicked closed behind her. After the elevator doors opened, I peered out onto the subterranean parking garage beneath the hospital. The rows of cars stretched up and away in one direction and down in another. There were 3 levels. My car was parked nearby. I always managed to snatch a good spot, but tonight it felt like a long march awaited me. The interaction between the patients stayed with me, something unnerving in her confident swagger, and the way her eyes peered out from the folds of scarves rankled even hours after she'd been escorted out of the ER. I took a breath and pulled my messenger bag strap across my chest, bandolier style. As I proceeded down the aisles, flanked by cars on both sides, I turned my head back and forth, fearing the image of the crouched form and obscured face of Aiden Corey. But each gap between the cars was vacant. Finally reaching my little white coupe, I turned to fit between my car and the neighbor who had parked half over the line. I kept my guard up, though, rubbernecking to see behind me as I shuffled to the driver's side door. With my eyes still trained on the aisle behind me, I clutched the door handle. Instead of chrome, I was touching fabric, silk, or something like it. Looking down, I saw that I was holding a scarf of deep violet. It was wrapped several times around the door handle. I suddenly felt as though I'd walked into a trap. I was penned in by the 2 vehicles and the cement barrier behind. Without looking down, I pulled the fabric until it slid free of the door handle. I gave the door a quick pull to be sure it was still locked. It was. Before getting in, I peered in the back seat to be certain no one lay in wait. There was only a heap of my gym clothes and a bouquet of reusable shopping bags stuffed into one another. As I drove home, I considered whether or not I'd share the events of the night with Nicole. She was already about as keyed up as I'd ever seen her over these fires around the complex. I could imagine she'd tell me to quit my job, hire a security detail, or maybe walk around with a machine gun. In the end, I told her everything, and she loaned me her pepper spray. It was a cute little thing, a pink 5-inch plastic tube with cat ears at the top. There were even a few sequins. Inside was a metal canister of concentrated offal, I assumed. I held the thing at arm's length, studying the design. "There's no reason you can't express yourself while you defend yourself, Diane," Nicole quipped. 2 days later, as Nicole installed doorbell cameras outside each of our apartments, the building manager approached us. He was a thin, sad-eyed 40-something named Dave, who always looked like he'd lost track of his winning lottery ticket. "Ladies, are those things battery-powered? You can't do any hardwiring in the apartments." "We're not in the apartments, though, are we, Dave?" Nicole teased. "Yes, they're battery-powered," I offered, keen to end the interaction quickly. Dave mumbled to himself as he walked off and then stopped and turned like he'd just remembered something. "Ladies, the cops have a description of the person setting the fires. They're doing a sketch, and I asked if we could hang it around the complex." "Whoa, that's so cool," Nicole said. "What does he look like?" I asked. Dave rolled his eyes. "So quick to assume, you girls. Not him. Her. And I don't know. I haven't seen it yet." He hit the elevator button and looked at his watch as if he were timing it to make sure no maintenance was needed. Nicole turned and got back to work on the camera, muttering something about Bluetooth being a pain in the ass. I stood, staring at the place Dave had occupied before stepping into the elevator. The instant he'd said, "Not him, her," Aiden Corey had flashed in my mind. Not the scarf-covered version of her that leered over me at the nursing station counter, but that fuzzy silhouette, peering down the ER hallway. The shape and posture were so reminiscent. But of what, I still couldn't say. "I'm going inside. I don't feel well. Can you show me how this connects to my phone another time?" Nicole didn't take her eyes off her work. "Sure. Ginger ale in my fridge if you want." That night, I stood in my kitchen, with a can of seltzer in one hand and my book in the other. I was a few chapters into a Peter Swanson mystery. I must have been standing for a long time, because the fizz had begun to die off in the can when I finally took a sip. My phone hummed in my pocket. It was a text from Nicole. "This video shows you how to connect your phone to the camera. Mine works fine. Was easy." The text included a link to a YouTube clip. Later, I thought, leaving the kitchen. I settled into my favorite chair. It was positioned in the corner of the living room, angled toward the window. Half an hour, and 3 chapters later, I was drifting from the page as I tried to piece together the tangled threads of the story. Like with Agatha Christie's, I always tried to solve the mystery before this author pulled back the curtain at the end. My gaze rose to the window and the drab, pockmarked parking lot outside. Someone was there. Checking my watch, I saw that it was well after 10 p.m. The person was standing beside a defunct payphone that the city hadn't bothered to tear out with the rest of the Y2K relics. Much of their body was obscured by the hood of the payphone, but I could see that it was a woman. Her hair was shoulder length, and she wore what looked like hospital scrubs. A dark-colored baseball cap was pulled down, masking much of her face. She was staring at my window. Even among dozens of windows lining this side of the building, pushing dim evening light out into the gloom, I was sure she was looking at mine. I stood to see if moving might elicit a reaction. She hadn't moved an inch since I'd noticed her. As if to confirm my suspicion, she lifted a hand to the brim of her hat and tugged down gently, like a cowboy saying, "Ma'am?" Just then, an older woman approached her from behind. It was Mrs. Reed, a sweetheart who had lived in the building through all my time there. It didn't strike me as odd to see her out so late. She would walk her toy poodle 6 times a day if the weather allowed. However, the dog seldom touched the ground. He only rode along in her handbag, blinking sagely at passers-by. Mrs. Reed stopped and spoke to the woman beside the payphone. The woman in the ball cap said something, and Mrs. Reed reared back as if she'd been slapped. She pulled her handbag, dog and all, to her chest and stalked away, casting a worried glance back at the stranger. The woman watched Mrs. Reed go long enough that she must have entered the building. Then she looked up at my window again. Once she'd seen me, still watching, she knelt, From behind the payphone, she lifted a broken cinder block. One corner crumbled away. She hooked her hand through one of the holes of its figure eight and started walking, with effort, toward the cluster of cars parked closer to the building. My heart began thumping as I watched her labored steps leading her on a line straight to my car. Then she stopped, standing beside the hood. She looked up again to the window. It was hard to be sure, but I think she shrugged. In a fluid motion, she swung the cinder block up and let it fly into the windshield of my car. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice immediately smothered by the carpet and low ceiling of my apartment's living room. I scrambled over the chair to the side table and seized my phone. As I dialed the police, I watched her dust her hands off in the overdone way a mime might do, and then saunter toward the corner of the building. I pressed my face to the window, watching her until she was entirely out of view. As I explained what had just happened to the 911 dispatcher, my phone chimed a few polite doot-doots to let me know someone else was calling. I glanced at the screen and saw that it was the hospital. The man taking my details told me that a police car would be at my apartment soon, and that I could meet them in the lobby if I felt safe doing so. I thanked him and said goodbye just in time to take the other call.
Diane, hi.
I knew the voice. It was Martha, the director of emergency services. She was my boss's boss. I'd only spoken to her a few times, once when I was hired as a nurse, and then again at a Christmas party. But I'd heard her speak at meetings and trainings hundreds of times. "Martha, how are you?" I answered, a slight tremble in my voice. In the last 5 minutes, I'd had to call 911 and take a call from a big shot at work.
I'm not great, Diane. I'm sorry to call you so late, but I wanted you to hear this from me. I'm calling to tell you that as of tonight, you've been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. You should also be prepared to speak with the police. I don't know if you have a lawyer.
I interrupted. "Wait, what? Are you calling the right person? You know this is Diane Royce, right?" Seemingly unfazed, she pressed on.
Yes, Diane. I'm not meant to get into all of this now, but there's fentanyl missing from the med closet. A lot of it. It appears that you were the one in and out of the room when it was pulled.
As she spoke, my legs began to wobble beneath me. I stumbled back and fell gracelessly into the chair. With an effort, I slowed my breathing and spoke. "That's impossible, Martha. I have never taken anything from the med room that wasn't for a patient and wasn't ordered by a doctor. You guys can't do this to me."
You know, Diane, I was dreading making this phone call, but a part of me was holding out hope that you'd own up, and maybe this could be good for you in the end. I don't know what you have going on, but do me the favor of not treating me like an idiot.
"What are you talking about?" I asked. My face was hot, and I could hear the volume of my voice rising to a frenzy.
I'm watching a video of you taking the meds right now, Diane. You're even shameless enough to look up at the camera and smile.
Nausea was growing in my gut. I could taste copper in my mouth, and my scalp began to tighten on my skull. I heard Martha's voice carry on in tones of admonishment. The sound seemed far away. I let the phone fall to the floor and nearly didn't make it to the bathroom before the vomit surged up my throat. When I asked the police officer responding to my 911 call if he knew whether I'd be arrested for the missing drugs, he looked at me like I had two heads. I think part of me wanted to get whatever was coming over with. After he'd gathered details on the damage to the car, he recommended his brother-in-law's glass repair business and left. I stood in the parking lot, shivering as I looked at the cinder block, still cartoonishly implanted in my car's windshield. If it hadn't been my car, sitting in a dumpy apartment parking lot, it might have passed for one of Banksy's art installations. Before going to bed that night, Nicole had helped me tape some plastic trash bags over the windshield. "You have a stalker. You know that, right?" she'd asked, fumbling to separate a strip of blue painter's tape from the roll. I looked at her and nodded numbly. I had nothing to say. I didn't know where to begin. The one thing I was sure of was that the car, the scarf, the nonsense at the hospital, it was all tied to Aiden Corey. I only wish I'd gotten a good look at her face through the window before she'd set off with the cinder block. Nicole continued. I know the work stuff's scary, but Diane, I think this girl could kill you. She's obviously unhinged. She's doing all of this and she doesn't even know you. I bent at the hip and rested my forehead against the cool of the car hood. I mumbled, my voice smothered by the metal pressing my face and lips. I know. I'm appropriately scared shitless. What I don't understand is what your boss said about you being on camera. It's gonna get cleared up, Nikki. I might not have even been in the building when they say this happened. Saying that out loud felt good. Reason was going to prevail. I knew I hadn't stolen meds, so this was all going to be ironed out before long. Repeating that refrain in my head was probably the only thing that helped me steal a few hours of sleep that night. I woke early and lay for a long time looking at the Italy-shaped water stain on the ceiling above my bed. I tried to lay out a course of action for the day. I needed a new windshield. I had to speak with Martha in person, ideally without handcuffs on my wrists. And I had to find out who Aiden Corey was. I darted an arm out from the warmth of the covers and snagged my phone from the nightstand. I had a text notification from Nicole. I know you've got a lot on right now, but have you thought about the possibility that the craziness at work is connected to the woman stalking you? Of course, I typed, but I can't figure out how. She responded right away. Off topic, but did you call Mrs. Reed the C word? I wrote back, no, who would ever do that? She's so sweet. She didn't message back. Despite the looming threat of drug charges and the near certainty of losing my job, it was Aiden Corey's face, or the absence where a face should have been, that dominated my thoughts. I decided I would try to kill two birds with one stone and head to work. I could check our computer system, see if it could teach me anything about this woman. Then I would go to Martha's office and face the tempest she was sure I had unleashed. I searched local attorneys online as I drank some coffee. No one was advertising that they specialized in false drug charges. It became clear that I had no idea what I was looking for. So I trusted the Google ratings and jotted down the number for a Williams and Wilson attorneys at law. 40 minutes later, I'd parked Nicole's car in the lot below the hospital. She wasn't working today and planned to binge Netflix without leaving the couch. I covered the distance between my parking spot and the elevators before realizing how frightened I'd been the last time I was there. Today, I felt focused. I wondered why. Indignance, perhaps. Between the fires at the apartments, the lunatic stalking me, and this missing fentanyl mess, I felt like the universe had decided that this was my month for unjust punishment. When I stepped out of the elevator, I kept my head down and pretended to be checking my phone. The screen was off, and I only saw my own drawn expression. As I walked, looking at my reflection, an idea began to form in the back of my mind. A deranged, wild idea. The thought was demolished by my collision with Sherry. She was standing, her back to me, filling out a form on the nursing station counter when I walked right into her. Sherry, I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking, I blurted. I didn't stop moving as I spoke. I needed as much time on the computer as I could get before Martha, or whomever, got wind of my presence. Diane, how are you? Sherry said. Her voice had the sanguine tone we use with terminal patients. Never better. Is Martha in today? I chirped brightly, already logging into one of the computers. I don't know. I haven't had to go to her floor today, Sherry said, her voice wandering and cautious. I'll only be a minute, I offered dismissively. I glanced up to see Sherry walking tentatively toward the elevators. I got a hit on the name Aiden Corey immediately. There was only one. Got you, I hissed quietly. The record of her in our system was old but seemed complete. A twitch of optimism bubbled in my chest for the first time in days. Name: Aiden Corey. Sex: female. Admittance date: July 14, 1998. Complaint: back pain, fever, congestion, nausea. Admission, history, and physical. The patient presents with symptoms consistent with influenza, including fever, chills, myalgia, fatigue, headache, sore throat, and persistent cough. A clinical presentation strongly suggestive of viral infection. No signs of secondary bacterial infection at this time. Hospital course. Patient initially admitted with stable signs, but quickly developed signs of sepsis. Despite aggressive IV fluids, antibiotics, and pressors, she deteriorated and ultimately went into cardiac arrest and was unable to be resuscitated. Discharge date: patient deceased, July 19th, 1998. Age: 78. Dead? I said the word aloud as I blinked and read again to be sure I wasn't mistaken. This must have been the wrong person. Where were the records for the Aiden that was here the other night? Who's dead? I looked up to see Martha, her arms folded across her chest. The colossal security guard stood just beyond her. Me, from the sounds of it, I said, with a sarcastic bounce of my eyebrows. You need to leave, Diane. She turned her head and spoke to the security guard. Stewart, this is Diane Royce. She needs to leave the property. I stood and spoke quickly. Martha, let me see the video. When did this even happen? She didn't answer. She stepped aside and crossed her arms again. The guard ambled around the counter and beckoned for me to come out from behind the nursing station. Martha wouldn't meet my eye as we passed. My new friend, Stewart, murmured a hushed apology to me as the elevator door closed, erasing Martha's scowl from view. As soon as we began to move, he stepped away to create space between us. Offering a meek smile, he mumbled, She's just about the worst, huh? I chuckled softly and nodded. As the bell chimed for the garage level, I thought about asking Stewart to walk me to my car. I opened my mouth to speak, but his cell phone rang. He answered it, nodded to me, and I stepped out, alone. The door shut on Stewart's voice, complaining into the phone about a bad signal. I heard the elevator sail away, back into the bright white of the hospital above. I stood, now gripping the pepper spray and scanning the dimly lit garage. There weren't many cars on this level. I'd parked as close as possible to the elevator bay and only needed to cross 30 feet to reach Nicole's car. Moving slowly, I circled the vehicle, peering in the windows and down into the footwells of each seat. The car was empty. Before starting it, I sent Nicole a text. All good at the hospital, more or less. Coming home. She responded immediately. You need to see this. 3 dots blinked, indicating she was sending more. Then a photo appeared. It was a pencil-drawn face, the police sketch that Dave had hung around the building. The drawing was of me. I tossed the phone away with a shriek. It bounced on the passenger seat and tumbled with a clatter into the nether realm between the seat and the center console. Suddenly, my apartment didn't even feel like a safe place to be. I buckled myself in and pushed the keys into the ignition. I could visit my mom today. Her house was nearby and quiet. Maybe I could have a moment to make sense of some of the chaos that had stumbled upon me. I gripped the mirror and glanced up to check the angle. There was a woman in the reflection. She wore hospital scrubs. From across the garage, she began walking briskly toward the car from behind. My eyes stretched open as I tried to understand the image. I was looking at me, my perfect double. Her face was a mirror image of my own. Her hair was styled precisely like mine, up in a ponytail. I was petrified. This horrifying, uncanny nightmare had reached the car before I could react. The backseat door opened, and she stepped in. My eyes were locked in the rearview mirror. Looking at her, up close now, the likeness was sickening. She even wore my earrings. My mother had given me those earrings for my 18th birthday. After an agonizing moment, she spoke. "Good to see you again, Diane. I'm Aiden." "No, you're not. Aiden Corey is dead. What the hell do you want?" My chest was rising and falling like an Olympic swimmer's. I was aware then of the seatbelt holding me snugly in place. I thought I'd made myself clear. I told you, I'm here now. Told you a few times, as I recall. You must understand that we can't both stay. I didn't respond. There was a soft flutter of movement behind me. As the dark-colored scarf sailed out from the back seat and swung around my neck, I wasn't contemplating the horror of my mortality or drawing up a heroic escape plan. Instead, I was finally forming that wild idea I'd begun back upstairs as I stared at my reflection in my phone. The violet garrote tightened inexorably into a silken noose. The fluorescent lights of the garage trembled and then dimmed in front of me. In the mirror, I could only see her eyes glaring with intense hatred. And I think that was when Aiden Corey killed me.